Start. You have 2 minutes. Good morning. I'll call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. It's April 17th, 2014. I'm Lisa Bender, chair of the committee, and we now have quorum. That's what we were waiting for. I'm joined by council members Goodman, Johnson, Council President Johnson, and we do expect council members Reich and Warsami to join us today. We have 3 items on today's agenda. The first is a public hearing regarding 2320 Colfax Avenue South. If you'd like to speak about the public hearing, please sign in with the clerk. And then we'll come back to that item in just a moment. The second item is on our consent agenda, and I'll return to that after just describing quickly the third item, which is discussion of Thrive 2040, which is a draft of the Metropolitan Council's 30-year regional plan. And that will be a discussion with staff and the committee. So the second item is on our consent agenda. This is to approve corrected a legal description of VAC 1540 vacating part of an alley on the block bound by Lyndale Avenue South, 29th Street West, Lake Street West, and Aldrich Avenue South, as originally approved in 2008. Are there any questions or comments about this item? Seeing none, I'll move approval of item number 2. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That motion carries. Returning to item number 1, the public hearing. This is an appeal submitted by Michael Crow of the Heritage Preservation Commission's decision, notwithstanding staff recommendation, to deny the demolition of historic resource application for 2320 Colfax Avenue South. And so we'll start with staff, Mr. Smoley, and then I'll just also, after Mr. Smoley is done, have Mr. Nielsen kind of give a quick rundown of the legal question here, because I know this came before the council last year as well.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Smoley, here to brief you on the Heritage Preservation and appeal of the Heritage Preservation Commission's denial of a demolition of a historic resource application at 2320 Colfax Avenue South, which you see depicted here. This was back on March 18th. If you were here back in May, you may remember this property as the subject of an appeal of the Heritage Preservation Commission's determination that the property did meet the definition of a historic resource, defined as meeting one of our city's 7 historical significance criteria. The Zoning and Planning Committee did determine that the property did indeed meet the definition of a historic resource. Historic resource demolitions need to be approved by the Heritage Preservation Commission. So staff instructed the property owner at that time that if they did wish to demolish their property, they'd have to submit a demolition of a historic resource application and bring that to the Heritage Preservation Commission, which they did. That appeal is now before you. Before approving the demolition of a property determined to be a historic resource, the Commission shall make findings that are much broader than what they considered and what you all considered back in 2013. The Commission makes findings that the demolition is necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition on the property, or that there are no reasonable alternatives to the demolition. And they consider the significance of the property, so you do consider that significance once again as part of this determination. They also consider the integrity of the property or its ability to communicate its historical significance as evidenced by the retention of specific historic physical features. The Commission also considers the economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, including its current use, costs of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. So as you can see, this is a much broader question than what you all took on last May. I think that's reflected in public comment as well. The chair of the committee last year, back in May, noted that they had received an overwhelming amount of public comment on the project at that time. And I'd say that we have received an overwhelming amount of public comment on the project for this iteration as well. Public comment last round, back in May, was almost unanimously in favor of the determination that the property did meet the definition of a historic resource. For this question, whether the demolition is permissible, in my estimation, the public opinion is really split. The HPC, in examining this question, did focus on all the different aspects of the findings, but with one exception. They didn't focus on whether the demolition was necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition on the property. No one contends that, to include the property owner. The Heritage Preservation Commission's discussion focused on whether there are reasonable alternatives to the demolition. To begin with, they focused on the property's significance. Here's the property as it appeared in about 1900. One of the first comments that came up from the Commission was whether Thomas Kenyon, the second owner of the property, and a pharmaceutical jelly salesman should be considered whether the property should be considered eligible for designation based upon his significance. Staff, in its determination, felt that he was not quite as significant as the original owner of the property, Edward Orth, who appears to be best remembered for being the son of pioneering brewer John Orth. The commission also discussed how many of Healy's remaining buildings ought to be legally mandated for preservation. There are many out there. Here's a great example: our Healy Block Historic District, previously designated by the City Council. The commission discussed whether this home in particular, 2320 Colfax, not what you see depicted here, but the subject of this appeal, whether that might represent a significant transition in Healy's career in terms of the home's size, its style, or its price. They did discuss this property at 3115 2nd Avenue South, constructed 2 years prior to 2320 Colfax Avenue South. It does appear to have the colonial revival characteristics that you see in 2320 Colfax Avenue South. This property is protected. It's part of the Healy Block Historic District, and it was also Healy's home. There was some question, too, as to whether or not the World's Columbian Exposition held the same year, 1893, as 2320 Colfax's construction, whether that, which popularized the colonial revival style, might have influenced Healy's turn away from Queen Anne's toward the colonial revival. Here we see an example of a property constructed 2 years earlier, which arguably symbolizes that transition, if any one building could be said to mark a transition in an architect or master builder's career. The commission also considered, in terms of the property's significance, its contribution to neighborhood character and whether the entire Wedge neighborhood itself ought to be designated as a historic district. In 2005 and 2008, evaluators hired by the city and the neighborhood group did not make that recommendation. They did, however, determine that there is a potential historic district of colonial revival homes built by master builders to include T.P. Healy immediately south of the subject property. And by immediately south, I mean literally the next lot to the south. This district itself, well, certainly we could consider trying to designate the entire Wedge neighborhood, but in doing so, I think we would really water down the quality of properties that you see evident in the Lower Hill East Potential Residential Historic District. Here's an example of some of those properties, which evaluators noted had remarkable integrity. 50 out of 53 properties retained their integrity to communicate their historical significance. Trying to designate large areas that do have some remaining examples of a particular builder's work can by necessity take in a lot of properties that are pretty much unrelated to that. Whereas focusing on a very tight concentration of highly significant properties that do retain their integrity produces a much higher quality result, which you can see here in this potential historic district. Just to give you an idea of the district itself, a close-up here is a property that is in that historic district, 2424 Colfax Avenue South, less than a block away, also built by Healy. And this one does retain its barn, which you can see at the rear of the property here. 2320 Colfax does not retain its barn. And also to give you an idea of the, just the plethora of Healy properties that we have in the area, here are 2 more Healy homes, 2 and 3 lots to the north of the subject property. The commission considered whether or not Healy might have used 2320 Colfax as sort of a pattern for future homes in our city. A home at 1716 DuPont Avenue South looks remarkably similar to the way 2320 Colfax looked originally. And in that sense, staff would say that if there are better remaining examples of a particular pattern of Healy homes, those ought to be preserved. This being a great example of a home that time has treated quite well. 2320 Colfax, suffering fires and a large number of alterations, has not fared quite as well. And the commission did consider that when considering the property's integrity itself. They considered integrity in general, and here you can see a lot of changes between the home as it stands today and as it appeared historically, the porch being one of the biggest. There's also a rear porch that's gone and a rear addition that has appeared. The barn itself is gone. Wood siding is now vinyl. Some window openings that were once in place are now gone. A lot of the decorative detailing is gone as well. The commission also considered the ability of the property to be restored and whether or not that warranted designation simply because the property could be restored. When making analyses of integrity, we look at what is physically evident in a property itself, not what it could become. We have heritage preservation regulations, not heritage restoration regulations. If someone does choose to restore the property in the future, we could certainly reevaluate the property at that time and consider whether it's eligible for designation. But at this point, staff feels that the property does not retain its integrity. The Commission considered the interior of the property as well. There have been a lot of changes over time, and here you can see some representative photos. A fire in the early 1980s and a series of renovations at that time have made, in staff's opinion, the interior's character decidedly 1980s. There are definitely some historic features that are still sprinkled throughout the property. Here you can see some very nice wainscoting with a portion of a balustrade, a few spindles, the vast majority of which have been replaced, however. One commissioner did note that in terms of the interior's integrity, the Commission rarely designates properties and protects their interiors. So they did not feel that that would serve as an impediment to designating this home, should they choose to focus on the exterior of the property itself. The Commission also considered the economic value or usefulness of the structure, focusing especially on feasible alternative uses. They did discuss in some detail the adequacy of efforts to market this property for sale, which websites it had been posted on, for how long, and by whom. They discussed the Commission's ability, and your ability as well, to, if you choose, institute a 180-day demolition delay, which would allow property owners or members of the public interested in protecting the property an opportunity to act to protect it. I would note that, and the Commission did note this as well, that no one has nominated the property for landmark designation since the determination was made over 180 days ago that the property is a historic resource. The Commission also discussed the feasibility of moving such a large, heavy residence, which at one time was proposed, but fell through for various reasons, I think primarily because a lack of funding and just the distance that and cost that would be required to undertake such a project. In the end, the Heritage Preservation Commission voted 5-3 to deny the demolition and commence a designation study. I know the applicant is here and they'd like to speak, or the appellant, I should say, is here. They'd like to speak, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Smalley. Does the committee have any questions for staff? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Smalley. Did you take into account the 200 emails we received between 7 o'clock last night and 9 this morning in opposition to the demolition of the house, or are those not considered part of your weighing where public opinion is at?
Councilmember Goodman, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I have not had time to read the 300-plus emails that I received after 5:30 last night.
But you would acknowledge there have been hundreds of emails in favor of the preservation of the house.
Absolutely, and there have been many, many as well. Until 5:30 last night, in staff's opinion, it was a decidedly split vote in terms of public comment and public.
But as of this morning?
I have not had time to read the 300-plus emails that I received.
I could tell you they're all in favor of preservation of the house. So I just want to make sure that's part of the record, that we've received hundreds of emails. On both sides, we've received a lot of emails, but pretty much since last night, all of them have been in favor of preservation of the house.
I would have loved to have taken those into account. It's just difficult receiving 300 emails the night before.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm not thrilled it's clogging up my email, but I think to not acknowledge it is a little bit disingenuous.
I can also answer that question. So I did have my staff, we received 300 plus emails starting around, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 p.m. last night. Most of them appear to not be from the city of residents of the city of Minneapolis. That doesn't mean they are not part of the conversation, but most of them appear to be from people who do not live in the state of Minnesota. So my staff went through and forwarded all of the ones that we had received as of 8 a.m. or so this morning to the clerk. Those will be in the public record, and then we will continue to forward all of the emails that we receive for the public record. Are there any other questions for staff? And then I thought, Mr. Nielsen, since this question had come before the council a year ago, it might be confusing. Why is it back now? And can you explain the legal framework of the question before the committee today?
Sure, Chair Bender. I actually think Mr. Smalley kind of accurately addressed it, and so maybe I'll just be repeating what he said. But the code requires CPED to evaluate every application for demolition that is submitted in the city to determine whether the property is a historic resource. And to be clear, that determination is not a decision on designation or the ultimate historic merit of a building. It's kind of a threshold determination that really dictates process going forward. And so they look at every application for demolition to see if to make a preliminary determination whether it's a historic resource. Historic resource, again, just for a reminder, is defined as property that is believed to have historical, cultural, architectural, archaeological, or engineering significance, and to meet at least one of the criteria for designation as a landmark or historic district as provided in this chapter. And so if CPED determines that it is a historic resource, that dictates a public process whereby the demolition request goes to the HPC. If they determine it's not, it can be administratively approved. And so what happened with this last year is an application for demolition was made. CPED made the preliminary determination that it was not a historic resource, and so it was going to be administratively approved for demolition. And a group of residents who were aware of that administrative determination appealed that, which they have a right to do. And that is the issue, solely the issue of whether it's a historic resource or not, that made its way up through the council. Ultimately, the council determined it was a historic resource. And so now what we have currently is an application for demolition of a historic resource, which is a new application. It's not the same as what happened before. As Mr. Smoley said, it's a bit broader scope of review that you now have before you. In particular, the code provides a basis to approve demolition of a property determined to be a historic resource. There is a burden of proof that's on the applicant to show to you that the demolition is necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition on the property, or that there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition. Stressing the word reasonable, it's reasonable alternatives. It doesn't just mean that there's any alternative or a potential alternative. It's a reasonable alternative, and there's a subjective weighing of the factors there to determine whether something's reasonable. And then the code does give you some guidance to guide your decision on whether something is a reasonable alternative or not, specifically noting that you shall consider, but not be limited to, the significance of the property, the integrity of the property, and the economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, including its current use, costs of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. And so that essentially is how the issue is teed up before you today.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. With that, I'll invite the appellant to come up and speak. And then after that, we'll open the public hearing. And I'll start with the folks who've signed in. And so if you haven't signed in, please do with the clerk. You can sign in at any time during the public hearing.
Yep. My name is Michael Crow. I live at 2744 Aldridge Avenue South, and I own the property at 2320 Colfax Avenue South. In 1991, I purchased both 2320 and 2316 Colfax Avenue South with the extra land that they are on in the R6 zoning, thinking that someday I or someone might be able to develop it. During the next couple of decades, 2320 was inspected twice by the city of Minneapolis for its historical value, and I was told because of the changes on the building that it did not qualify for a historical designation, and based my decisions off of that information furnished by the city of Minneapolis. I was not directly responsible for any of the changes on the building. In 1960, the building was resided with asbestos slate siding, which cannot be bent, so all the round bays, bows, and the apron that went all the way around the second and first level had been removed. In 1948, the front and back wood frame porches were replaced with limestone foundations and four-season living spaces. The fire in 1991, before I purchased the building, destroyed the interior of the second and third floors. And the work that I did on it was all work that the city of Minneapolis required to bring it up to the building codes of the current day for an apartment building. It was said that I used the building as a cash cow and did not put money back into it, which is not true. I've made over $250,000 worth of improvements: roof, siding, windows, doors, chimney, boiler, water main, kitchen, bathroom remodels. The reason I have asked the people that are involved with making the decision on this building to please take a look at it is it's hard to even imagine how much has been altered without seeing it for yourself. And when you walk through the fire door on the second floor, it's like walking into a new apartment building or a hotel. I've been trying to sell the building since 2008 after a deal fell through with Alliance Housing. Because they were not able to get the federal grant money for historic restoration because the building needed too much work to bring it back to its original appearance. I have listed it on LoopNet, Zillow, Craigslist, Oodle, and have found some of the listings going back as far as January 2009 that I have with me today. I've contacted at least 8 real estate companies and every for-profit and nonprofit that has need for this type of housing, and did not care what it sold as, but listed it as what it was, a rooming house or a multifamily, and was hoping that I would not have to displace the tenants that had been there a long time, and also because I didn't want to bother the tenants with showings every day and invade their privacy. Over the last year and a half, we've been in most all the newspapers in Minneapolis, local, national TV, without one person coming forward with an offer on the building. The apartment development would be the best thing for the city, the neighborhood, and the businesses in the area. Another issue that was brought up by the HPC was that one of the members said she or they were not there to make the property owner more money. The sale price was set before the HPC was ever involved and is actually below the latest appraised value. The reason I've been trying to sell the property is because I've had severe health issues in the last 10 years. I'm on my 3rd aortic valve. My natural valve was replaced due to a birth defect. My first artificial valve was replaced due to an infection that destroyed it. The valve replacements are not cures, they're just temporary fixes to a permanent problem. And because the infection destroyed my first artificial valve, I can only have one more. In between the 2 valve surgeries, I had a back surgery and need a more serious back surgery that I haven't been able to have because of the problem selling the building and the amount of time that I'll have to be off. With the problem of selling building, being self-employed and without short or long-term disability and not being able to work has been horrible. As a self-employed person, I have to be able to count on myself and what I have or what I thought I have, and when people take that right away and don't offer a solution, something is wrong. On April 5th, 2013, shortly before the appeal with the HPC that Anders Christensen filed, he sent me an email saying that he and some group he was putting together to buy the building would contact me. And I've never heard another word from Anders or anyone else since they received the decision that they wanted. Even after sending him an email on April 7th of 2015 telling him my situation and how badly I needed to sell it. I told everybody that wants to move the building at their cost, I would sign any release that they would need. And if the building is not moved, I will salvage whatever little is left in it so nothing goes to waste. I have been put in a position where I've had to make a choice between having a private life and losing everything I have left, or telling the whole world my personal problems and hope that somebody cares and does the right thing. I hope none of you are ever put in that position. If you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. Are there any questions for the appellant? Okay, thank you. Seeing no questions, I will open the public hearing. And as I said, I'll just go through the list of folks who have signed in. Oh, that's fine.
The applicant had a few folks who wanted to speak, but that's okay if you.
Chair Bender, I think typically it's probably advisable to allow the appellant to make their case fully. If that involves some other team members, that's okay. And then proceeding from the sign-in sheet thereafter, that is fine.
Perfect. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amy Lucas of Landscape Research, the consultant that did the historic evaluation that is in your packets. I have attended all the hearings and did the initial evaluation after the staff at the historic resource public hearing. I'm not going to get into the long history of the building as much as the question of integrity and how important that is for historic designation. It's listed in the ordinance, and it's a big part of also the ability to get National Register historic tax credits for rehabbing a property. In this case, the owner is not eligible, even though it is an income-producing property, to receive tax credits for rehab because of the integrity issues. Similarly, in the Healy Block Historic District, there is a Healy house that lacked integrity and was listed as non-contributing in that historic district as well. It can be reevaluated if it is restored, rehabbed, and receives integrity. In this case, there are some major issues with the front porch, the vinyl siding, the vinyl windows, the loss of much of the interior. Much like Superior Plating, which was eligible as a historical building. It met the criteria for significance. It was the city's only trolley station, but it had 3 remaining elevations, actually brick, wood windows. An interior was also remaining, but it had been skinned on the main facade, and the commission at that time determined that because of the skinning, it was not eligible for historic designation. In this case, their evaluation was different, and integrity did not come into play as much, but I haven't seen the difference between this building and that one. In fact, there is less integrity, historic integrity on this property. But if you have any questions about the historic report, I'm available for that too.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas. Are there any questions about the historic analysis that's also included in the packet today? Okay. Is there anyone else from the appellants group? Thanks.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tony Crea, and I'm a representative of the Lander Group. Could I get the overhead projector turned on, or is that John? Michael Lander and the Lander Group has over 30 years of experience as an urban developer. We have achieved many industry design awards, including Minneapolis and St. Paul Preservation Awards. When assessing sites for acquisition, we first look for reuse, and our portfolio reflects that. This example here shown is the Marcy Homes, home in Marcy Homes, Andrews House. That was done in 1999 by the Lander Group and Michael. And there are many other examples that I'll share in a moment regarding our preservation of opportunities, not simply scrape and reconstruct. We feel existing buildings can often be reused and reworked, and their history add value and character. The most similar project to this Colfax site, as I referenced earlier, is the Andrews House, where we were invited by the neighborhood to renovate this incredible property. The cost to renovate exceeded value by over $400,000. That gap was supported by the neighborhood using NRP funds to fill that gap, and we successfully completed an award-winning project that met and or exceeded the community goals. Other examples that we have in renovation, not simply new construction: 35th and Hennepin, Station 23, Fire Station. Ninth Street Lofts in downtown St. Paul, 1905 warehouse renovation done in 2003. Another warehouse renovation in downtown St. Paul. Again, another renovation here on Humboldt in South Minneapolis. Irving in South Minneapolis.
Excuse me. Just to keep things moving along, I'd ask that you just keep comments to the property that we're here to talk about. Thank you.
Well, again, that really more or less concludes, but just wanted to share that we are simply not a scrape and new construct developer, but rather preservation-minded developer. I'll let Pete Keeley take over from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keeley.
Hi, Pete Keeley, Collage Architects. I was just talking to Tony real briefly. He had some numbers to share with you on the difference between the cost of renovation and actually the financial usefulness of the project, which are relevant. The $400,000 gap that he referenced on the previous example is very comparable to this example about the reasonableness of reuse. So the new development that's being proposed, it's a development on 3 city lots. Currently there are 2 homes on 3 city lots. Those 2 homes are boarding houses. Those boarding houses are non-conforming uses. Originally, going through the design process on this, we looked at this site. It's an R6 site. We thought that the R6 zoning was too high. We heard the neighborhood group reaction to buildings that are that big. We designed to an R4. The building that was put forth prior fit in an R4 zoning in terms of mass, height, and all of the metrics of the size of the building. There would have been one variance for a rear yard parking setback. So the new building, which fits in that, is looking forward. It's a very green, sustainable design that we're looking towards to provide options within the neighborhood. The pricing on that, which Tony will cover in a second, is something that can be feasibly done on the project in terms of purchase of the land, construction of the properties, and construction of the units. We think that the HPC ruling as to what is reasonable was flawed, which is the reason for the appeal, in that taking a single-family home that has been converted to a boarding house, one, if it was to be continued as a boarding house, would continue as a non-conforming use, and that the cost to do that was such, and that the use of that was such that it was not appropriate for the neighborhood, nor was it feasible. Now, could it be converted to a single-family home? Yes. The gap is around $500,000 to convert one home, this home, back to a single-family home. And that is not bringing it back to the historical look that TP Healy had. That is simply removing the structure, or removing some of the infill structure that's put in, doing some replacements on the porch, doing some life safety things within the building itself. It should be noted that that building is about 20 to 20, maybe 25% original. Everything else has been removed in that house at one time or another. Really, the only portion that's original on that house is probably the foundation. Many of the wood studs were replaced. Almost all the interiors were replaced. There's a couple windows that are still original, but there's a majority of it that is not. That's part of the reason that the reconstruction costs will cost a lot of money. The construction that has happened in the last 25 years has really been to make this a boarding house. A lot of that would have to be reversed to bring it back to some semblance of a single-family home. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Any questions? Would you like to address the financials? Thanks.
A few extra seconds to touch on the economic feasibility of the site. Renovation costs that we've analyzed both inside and out, using reputable contractors as references, were conservatively $150 per square foot, and they do not include design, marketing, and finance costs, and do not renovate to an historic finish level. Comparable sales after a renovation were valued at an estimated $240 per square foot for condominiums, and single-family homes are unlikely to achieve a $200 per square foot value. Adding the value of the existing building and including land, design costs, permitting, legal, landscape, financing, marketing, and reasonable contingency costs, without a profit, the gap for this project, as Pete referenced, is nearly $500,000. So in our assessment, renovation of the existing building we deemed unfeasible, which is why we have made the decision to pursue another course. Our new design does not go to the highest dollar return, but rather the best overall use and design. We did not bring forward an R6 project, even though the area is zoned for such, but rather an R4 project. The region and the city is committed to higher density and use, and we are developing to that goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else from the appellant? Okay. So now I will open the public hearing and start with the folks on the sign-in sheet. I'll ask that people come up and as I kind of read off the names, just come forward and get ready to testify. I will ask everyone to stick to 2 minutes today. We have a timer to help remember and remind us, and Councilmember Johnson is my timekeeper, our vice chair. And a reminder to please keep your remarks to the topic at hand, as well as not to repeat too much what someone else has said before you. So we have Brian Finstad, Will Lumpkins, Marley McLeod, Ezra Gray, and David Peel. Mr. Finstad. And please state your name and address for the record.
Yep. My name is Brian Finstad. I live at 2514 23rd Avenue North. And I have some information that's different than what you've heard before. It was mentioned that 3115 2nd Avenue South is actually TP Healy's first free classic. I happen to know that house quite well. That's actually my best friend's house. And I wouldn't expect most people to know this, but there's been a lot of alterations to that house. A lot of that is not original. What is original is stick and ball ornamentation, which is very Victorian. The interior is highly Victorian. So that, that issue came up to discredit the Orth house, and it simply isn't true. This is my best friend's house. I know this house very well. And I want to point out that in 1981, in Twin Cities Magazine, the Orth house was written about as being the watershed moment in T.P. Healy's career. That was written in 1981 in Twin Cities Magazine, far before this permitting process ever began. I'm just going to ad-lib a little bit here. As far as the numbers, last year Nicole Curtis was willing to pay $400,000 for the house, and for her it would have taken $150,000 to bring it back to a single-family home. You know, their numbers, big developers have numbers that are completely different than small-time rehabbers. I rehab houses for a living, and I want to point out that the tax value of this house is $388,000. I did my research in the community and was surprised to learn that one of our local nonprofits already knew of and had considered the Orth house as a potential project. They did not proceed because of the asking price of the property. It has been said that nobody had wanted this property. That is not true. This is the second developer I have firsthand knowledge of that did in fact want the property but could not compete with the asking price. The asking price is predicated on teardown economics. Michael Lander is willing to pay $650,000 for the site only, contingent upon approval of the destruction of the house. That is a value based on a contingency for an approval that does not already exist. At the HPC, it was stated that the Commission's advisement by the city attorney is that the Commission's concern is not the maximization of an individual's profit. What ordinance states is that their concern is determining that reasonable alternatives do not exist. The tax value of this property is $388,000. Fair market value for the property with the historic resource intact is what is reasonable. This is a valuable and desirable part of town. If priced at the actual value, redevelopment would occur. Until this property has been made publicly available at its current actual value, not a value predicated on approvals that don't already exist, a case that there are no reasonable alternatives is not supported.
Thank you. Mr. Lumpkins, and then Marley McLeod, Ezra Gray, David Peel. I can't quite make out, last name is Harris. And then Andrew Degetstrom.
Good morning. My name is Will Lumpkins. I live at 4503 Aldrich Avenue North. I just want to add that my mother was a longtime resident of the Healy block in the central neighborhood. And I would just like to speak to the issues of reasonable alternatives. I was informed that the state legislature has set aside $100 million for a mandate of the ward to construct 35 units of housing for low-income seniors. This is the exact population that the proposed Lander development is displacing. There are those that claim that adding units of housing supply increases housing affordability overall. That argument is naive at best, if not attempting to cloak displacement of low income or for upper income apartments in the name of affordable housing. While that theory may have some truth in an indirect, diffuse manner, so is the same argument made for trickle-down economics. There's no amount of housing units that is going to make affordable for low-income seniors to move into the wedge neighborhood tomorrow. This requires direct marketing intervention and is the purpose of the recently allocated monies. If the historic resource status of the house is keeping for-profit developers from rushing into this site, then we have a unique opportunity to do something different here. And right now there is funding available to do just that. I would encourage Lisa Bender, as the council member of the ward, that if she is serious about addressing equity and disparities, explore an adaptive reuse of the Orth house and development of the remaining parcel for the purpose of low-income senior housing. If we truly want to address disparities, we cannot continue to think that low-income housing is meant to be in Phillips and North Minneapolis, and that Uptown is just for hip young people in sexy buildings. This is a unique site, and as such, we should be exploring every creative way to get the most advantage of it, not rolling over the inevitability of gentrification. It is the mentality that has resulted in the divides that we are currently experiencing in the city.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Marley McLeod.
My name is Marley McLeod. I live at 2416 Colfax Avenue South. I also rent a business space at 1017 West 24th Street, which is pretty much across the street from the house in question. I'm a video editor and a filmmaker, and I'm currently working on a documentary about the importance of old housing stock in the life of a thriving, growing city. The appeals process doesn't exist so you can keep coming back until you get the answer you want. It exists as a process to ensure that the decisions that came before were arrived at according to the rules set out for them. So that's what we're here to do today. And I disagree that what we're looking at here is broader than the decision that came before. This is actually a very specific task. Necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition on the property, or that there are no reasonable alternatives. All the rest of that stuff, in determining whether reasonable alternatives exist, everything else supports that. It doesn't get considered independently. All right? So, according to a CPED staff report that I pulled off of the website for this meeting this morning, this was in the findings section. 1, this is a historic resource, and I'm paraphrasing, excuse me. 2, demolition is not necessary. And 3, reasonable alternatives exist. And that's a quote. That's from the CPED staff report. And then number 6, which is not in order, I skipped the other things because they didn't really apply, the house has economic value. It's really simple. And if you base your decision on something other than what the HPC based their decision on, then you're operating outside the rules, which I think is a really dangerous precedent to set. And I'm not a Minnesota native, but as a longtime resident and a keen observer, it's not very Minnesotan either.
Thank you. Ezra Gray. And then we have David Peel, Harris, and I'll let you go.
Hi, I'm Ezra Gray. I live at 2109 Bryant. We have to wreck 2320 Colfax. There's no reasonable alternative. It can't be restored. It's too far gone. So we're told. Well, I know differently. My wife and I live in one of these big old houses. It's a very similar house. It's a year older, the next street over. Our house was also an 8-room boarding house for decades. I have a 1978 picture of it looking every bit as sad as 2320 Colfax looks right now. We've been working on this house since we bought it. Last year, we reinstalled a working fireplace in the rear alcove where the original had been torn out and plastered over. I'm making stained glass to replace the pieces long gone from our windows. Every vestige of the apartments and boarding rooms is gone. It's a single-family home again, very nearly what it was in 1892, and it did not cost us $500,000 to do this. We have this great house that couldn't be built today for really any realistic price, and we're not the only ones doing this. They've never listed this house on MLS. They refuse to do it. If anyone wanted it, they say, well, they would have called them. It was in the paper. It was all over the TV. And it has to be sold as a boarding house. Well, as Crow's own realtor put it, rooming houses are a dying industry. They might as well be trying to sell it as a VHS rental shop. And then finally, they say, you just don't sell multifamily properties on MLS. It's not how it's done. That's also from the realtor. Well, there are 105 multifamily listings on MLS this morning. So I'm not sure where they get that information. That's just in Minneapolis. That's actually how our house is listed. That's how I found it. Crow and Lander have reasonable alternatives to wrecking this house. They just refuse to consider them. Please don't let them wreck this historic house. They can follow the rules like the rest of us and follow through with their other reasonable options for this house.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Peel.
So I'm David Peel, 3127 2nd Avenue South, and that is the Healy block that's been talked about. And I brought with a few pictures because people say that because this property's been a boarding house for so long and the integrity is impugned, that therefore it must be torn down. And they point to the better examples on the Healy block. But long before John Smoley came to town, he was probably writing his thesis at the time. The Healy block looked a lot worse. And Amy Lucas probably remembers this because she was working for the city at the time. That's the before picture at 3131 2nd Avenue South. It was a 12-room boarding house. the during picture and after. And now that's pointed to as a reason why the Orth house can't be restored. This house was every bit as bad as the Orth house, and it isn't anymore. Another house on the Healy block, similar condition, was about 8 units, boarding house. That's the before. That's the during. And that's the after. So this argument that it can't be done is just completely ridiculous. It's been done before, and I think to say that it has to be torn down is an argument to the purpose that somebody is pushing. It's not the only option, and I also fear for the loss of the affordable housing in the area because, as I emailed you all a few days ago, I think that's a big issue that little by little all of the affordable housing is disappearing, and what's most affordable is what is there. And we're not responsible for maximizing Michael Crow's profit. He can get market value for it. He wants a premium. I would too if I were the owner. I don't blame him, but sometimes that comes at too big of a cost to the city.
Thank you. Now we have Judy Harris, and then Andrew Degestrom, Sarah Lynn Ramanashan. I'll get better at that one. Paul Ryan, Scott Schaefer, then Pete Keeley.
Hi, my name is Judy Harris, and I manage rental properties for a man who owns 4 houses, multiple unit buildings within a block of this particular property in question. And he is totally for the development of what's going on. He has 3 TP Healy houses within that block of that, one of which is another rooming house on the same block that this property is on. What goes forward if you do this to this property? I have not seen anything as far as they talked about at the last meeting. I'm sorry, I got off point. At the last Historic Preservation Committee meeting, they said they were very close to voting in favor of allowing this to happen. The problem was they didn't think they had enough information about the reasonable alternatives. There has been no hardcore offers made to Mr. Crow, to my knowledge. I grant you I'm not him, but I'm pretty involved in a lot of things that are going on in the neighborhood. And a lot of people talk about restoring properties. I think that's wonderful. If you want it, buy it. You know, this gentleman has properties he wants to sell, and he's being prevented from selling it. To my knowledge, I've been in that house from stem to stern, and I don't know how many of you have actually done that, or any of the other people have actually toured it. There is very little left of the original. Restoring a house that just put up some extra doors and locks on the doors and called them boarding houses versus a house that has been burned and completely rebuilt, 2 stories of which have been completely rebuilt interior, that's a whole different story of restoring. You have to start all over with this house. The only thing you have to start with is the perimeter, the foundation, and the entryway of the original. So I support the development going forward and his ability to do what he wants to do with his property. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Degestrom, then Sarah Lynn, then Paul Ryan, then Scott Schaefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Degestrom, and my address is 2849 Irving Avenue South. I'm here today to speak on behalf of granting the appeal. Although there are a lot of arguments on both sides of this issue, as a committee you are limited to 599.480B of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances, which the content of which has been already referred to by Mr. Smoley and Mr. Nilsson. Although the applicant does not contend that demolition is necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition, there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition. Regarding the significance of the property, the building does not appear to be eligible for local designation as an historic landmark using the criteria found in 599.210. Specifically, only 2 of the 7 criteria are even debatable. Although it was built in the colonial revival style with Queen Anne influences, extensive alterations over the years have had a negative effect on the design. And although T.P. Healy is considered a master builder, the integrity of the property and better remaining examples of his work challenges the assertion that this exemplifies his work. When looking at the 7 aspects of integrity, this building only retains 2 of them, location and setting. regarding the economic value of the existing structure, costs to renovate and convert it to a conforming use are comparable with that of new construction. And finally, although your decision is confined to 599.480B, I just wanted to end with a broader policy argument. On April 16, 2013, the HPC denied demolition by declaring this building as an historic resource. When the building is declared an historic resource, 599.480A mandates that a designation study be conducted. That study was never conducted, and here we are a year later. The applicant, Mr. Crow, no longer wants to retain ownership of this property. However, he has not been able to sell without the ability to demolish. So, in a sense, it is as if the city has removed Mr. Crow of his property rights. At what point does this become a regulatory taking? I believe this is illustrative of a broader policy discussion around our heritage preservation ordinance that this committee needs to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Lynn Remington, then Paul Ryan, Scott Schaefer, Jeff Hemer, and we have about 12 more people, and we're going to lose Councilmember Goodman at 11, so I want to keep us moving.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lynn Romanishin, and I live at 2111 Aldridge, 2 blocks from the proposed development at 2320 Colfax. Thank you for allowing me to come before you. Just a quick note, something that was said before. Our house was also a boarding house, and I do most of the work for the renovations myself. There's still a lot more work to do. And also, most of us have had some sort of fire in our house's history. In fact, most of us more than one. So we've done a lot of work on those. I have 2 items to address. My first item is a request. I request that you please respect the knowledge and experience that sits on the Heritage Preservation Committee and uphold their educated decisions. The Heritage Preservation Commission exists for several reasons. It builds a future for our city by preserving the past. It enables Minneapolis to apply for federal matching grants for identification, preservation, and education activities for historic properties. And it encourages a local, state, and federal partnership to integrate historic preservation into city policy. In order to become certified by Minnesota's State Historic Preservation Office, Minneapolis must meet several requirements, chief of which are to enact a historic preservation ordinance and appoint a qualified Heritage Preservation Commission. Minneapolis is also required to maintain a system for identifying historic properties, enforce appropriate legislation for the designation and protection of historic properties, provide for public participation in our preservation program, and play an expanded role in nominating properties to the National Register. Although all of these points are important, please note one key word, and that word is qualified. The members of this commission were qualified to make the original decision and then to deny the appeal. And they are qualified to establish interim protection and direct the planning director to prepare or cause to be prepared a designation study. Therefore, my request is simple. Please do not negate the Commission's decisions and honor the knowledge and experience the members of the Heritage Preservation Commission are required to have and do have, and deny this appeal.
Thank you.
I have like 2 lines. My second item is short. I have lived in the Lowry Hill East neighborhood for 40 years, and I feel I'm able to form a knowledgeable opinion regarding this development and the area in question. Due to this perspective, I am against the demolition of this building. I feel the demolition of these 2 houses combined with the resulting development will tear a hole in the historic fabric of this neighborhood.
Okay.
It will replace it with an inappropriate patch, similar to a blue denim patch used to cover a hole on a pink silk shirt.
Thank you. I do have to keep us moving so we don't lose our committee members. Paul Ryan, then Scott Schaefer, then Jeff Hemer, then Tom Dunn.
Chair Bender?
Hello,
Sorry to interrupt, sir. I'm sorry. I just want to, Mr. Peel had some photographs that he presented, and Mr. Finstead referenced an article. If you guys could submit those to the clerk for the record, if they're not already in the record. And the statement that the last individual was reading, that you can also submit a written statement, and that will be in the record too. So I just want to remind people to do that. Thanks.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Paul Ryan. I live at 1934 Aldrich Avenue South in the Wedge neighborhood. I've lived in the Wedge neighborhood for about 14 years now, and I just wanted to speak to the economic value. That is one of the considerations you need to consider. 2320 Colfax Avenue South provides tremendous economic value to the people that are living in those 16 units. These are truly affordable units that allow lower income people the opportunity to live in the Wedge neighborhood. This house is a high-density development at the present moment. Demolishing a high-density development to build a higher-density development is illogical. Demolishing 2320 Colfax Avenue South for development that will not add diversity to the Wedge neighborhood. It already is providing tremendous diversity, having the house, having the residents that it has. This will only take away from the diversity of our neighborhood, which is one of the reasons I live there and the reason why many of my friends and neighbors choose to live in the Wedge neighborhood. There's no compelling argument to demolish this property according to the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Can
Got
I
you.
put up pictures from my iPhone on this? Or?
Why don't we
Okay. Sorry. You see, my name is Scott Schaefer. I live at 803 Douglas, about 5 blocks north of the subject property. Thanks for having this. You've seen some pictures of 2320 Bryant Avenue and 2424 Colfax Avenue South. And they're both beautiful TP Healy homes that are in the Wedge. And they were actually designated as as parts of potential historic district by the 2 historical reconnaissance surveys that went by. And it's really instructive to compare the pictures of those houses to the picture of 2320 Colfax Avenue South as it stands today. And if we wanted to make to do this great restoration and change this building into something that really communicates historical significance, we could do that, but we wouldn't be doing historical preservation anymore. We'd be doing historical restoration. It would be a replica. It wouldn't be an original historic building that could be placed on the historical landmarks register or anything. And that doesn't seem like a reasonable alternative to me. Compelling someone to do restoration on their home, compelling someone to continue maintaining a non-conforming land use, a rooming house that the city council has determined, new properties can't be rooming houses. Keeping people out of this walkable, vibrant, neighborhood where we'd be able to, if we increase the density, we'd be able to decrease carbon emissions by people, burning less carbon to move themselves around the city. I don't know. It'd be better for local businesses to have more foot traffic. Yeah. Anyway, I urge you to allow the demolition of this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Jeff Emer. Original presentation. Okay, I don't see Jeff here, but if you're here, come on up as we go along. Tom Dunn, then Saridwen Christensen, then John Jepson, then Andrews Christensen, then John Cunningham.
Good morning. My name is Tom Dunn. I'm a commercial real estate broker with Terra Firma Commercial, and I marketed the property for sale. I just want to address the notion that the seller is getting a premium on the sale of the property. He's actually selling it for the value that it would sell for if it was going to sell as a boarding house as well. The boarding house is economically obsolete, and we can't find anybody that would pay to continue to run the boarding house. That's really probably the only alternative use available. But I just wanted to say that I'm a commercial real estate broker, so my listings don't go out on the residential MLS, and this is a commercial property. Thus, we went and marketed commercially on the commercial MLS. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Christensen? Embarrassed I don't know how to say my neighbors' names.
That's okay. My name is Caridwen Christensen, and I live at 3232 Pleasant Avenue South. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. In August 2013, Betsy Hodges, our mayor, proposed that Minneapolis become a zero-waste city. Raising historic buildings results in a triple hit on scarce resources. First, we are throwing away thousands of dollars of embodied energy that are inside the building itself. the Earth House is not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. Second, we are replacing it with materials that are vastly more consumptive of energy. Third, constructing a new building would use even more energy and natural resources. We can see examples of the ephemerality of new buildings in the Walker Community Library building, which was recently landfilled after 30 years. The original Walker Library building still stands there. It's 100 years old, and it's been adaptively reused. The Lander website says the building concept promotes green living, close to and providing a variety of transportation options, services, recreation, and green space. The Orth House is obviously in this exact same location with the exact same access to green living. Relying on the behavior of the tenants, like the Lander project proposes to do to make it green, greenwashes the environmental toll of the building's construction in the first place. The proposed structure is not affordable housing. The current low-income tenants of the Horth House are likely living greener than any of the young professionals Lander hopes to attract. Betsy Hodges is rightly concerned about the economic costs of failing to reuse and recycle materials. She calls the effect of poor resource management, quote, a matter of social justice in Minneapolis. The ill effects of burning garbage fall disproportionately on low-income neighborhoods and people of color. The same can be said of Minneapolis's poor commitment to historic preservation. The environmental effects of new construction are so destructive that any commitment to a recycling program is nothing more than theater.
Thank you. Thank you for
Greenest
your
building
comments.
is the one standing.
John Jepson, then Anders Christensen, John Cunningham, Bob Roscoe.
Morning, John Jepson. I live at 3329 Irving Avenue South in the Uptown neighborhood. I am the president of Jepson Incorporated. I am a structural shoring, structural repair, and structural moving expert, as well as I own a carpentry subcontract division. I've done numerous historical projects in the state of Minnesota. The Whitney Condominium Building, 2007 Laurel Avenue in the Bryn Mawr neighborhood, the Mayowood Mansion in Rochester, the Bennett McBride Carriage House that was built by T.P. Healy, 3 different James J. Hill buildings, Station 19 Firehouse. I've been featured on HGTV and the DIY cable channels. I've also done work on some of Pete Keeley's jobs. I was given a chance to examine 2320 Colfax Avenue to see if it could be moved. While I examined the building, I determined, and even with the fires the building sustained in the age of the building, it was really in great condition. I had to figure out the approximate weight of the building, not including the foundation, which would be somewhere around 180 tons. During my examination, I discovered that beneath the vinyl siding, which is the equivalent to a blanket being pulled off, most of the original siding is still there. The foundation is in perfect condition. I was able to see the front original wall, which is covered up by the porch. Nobody has pictures of this. I was not allowed to take pictures with respect to the tenants that are in there. It is fully intact. No vinyl siding. The bowed windows are there. One piece of glass was missing. This is potentially 180 tons of waste that could go into a landfill.
Just a time reminder. Thank you. Okay, Anders Christensen.
The Orth House was built by T.P. Healy in 1893. Two significant events, I'm Anders Christensen, 4347 Garfield Avenue South, Madam Chairwoman and committee members. The Orth House was built by T.P. Healy in 1893. The two significant events of that year were the Chicago World's Fair and the Panic of 1893. The previous year, 1892, Healy built 13 large Queen Anne's and 7 barns for good measures. It was the height of the boom. Think 2007. In 1890, the population of America was 67 million people. The attendance at the Chicago World's Fair was 27 million people. The fair and its centerpiece, the White City, was a big deal. The fair didn't start or invent the neoclassical or colonial revival. It popularized them. The Panic of 1893 was the worst financial breakdown in U.S. history until the Great Depression of 1929. By December, 600 banks had failed. By June 1894, 194 railroads had gone bankrupt. By year's end, 2.5 million people were unemployed. Think 2008 and its aftermath, which we are still experiencing, only much, much worse. Faced with a severe financial crisis, having built 13 Queen Anne's on speculation the year before, the Queen Anne style, the style that Healy had perfected, was now out of fashion. He must now invent a new vernacular form, adapting what he knows how to do to conform to the new principles of marketing, principles of design emerging from the White City and the state buildings of the Chicago World's Fair. Healy built only 4 houses in 1893. The 4 houses were in 4 different neighborhoods: Central, Whittier, Lowry Hill East, and Lowry Hill.
Just a quick time check.
Yeah. So what do I do? Stop?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. What? So these are the 4 houses. The one is in the Healy block that was demolished for 35W. There was the one on Garfield, the Orth House. This house on Garfield in Whittier, which was demolished for this apartment building. And then the house on Douglas, 821, which was wrecked for this apartment building. 4 houses, 4 different neighborhoods, and the Orth House is the only one still standing. What I want to show you is, I'm just going to run quickly through pictures of what remains.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, John Cunningham, Bob Roscoe, Alicia Holder, Jana Flistrand, Brad Klein, and one final person.
Good morning, I'm John Cunningham. A few years ago, I read a book called The Tipping Point, and I think that's what we're talking about here. I don't want to add to what Mr. Christensen has just said, but I too own a Healy house. T.P. Healy was my great-grandfather. And in restoring this T.P. Healy house, which is designated both inside and out, it has been quite a challenge. In looking at this house and speaking with Mr. Jepson, the house is relatively intact under the vinyl siding and the stone on the front. So with I believe, in my professional opinion, it can be restored to a very, very good facsimile of the pictures that you see with Mr. Christensen. I also think that this house was doomed the moment the neighborhood was zoned R6. And what the tipping point is all about is which of the other houses in that neighborhood will become doomed if they become dilapidated the way this one has been allowed to become dilapidated. And I just want to leave you with that thought.
Thank you. Alicia Holder. Oh, sorry, Mr. Roscoe. I'll have you go after Ms. Holder. Thank you. Sorry about that.
All right, my name is Alicia Holder. I live at 2601 Golden Valley Road in Minneapolis, in North Minneapolis. I just wanted to say that another point of dispute with the staff report is that in evaluating the Orth House's economic viability, it only looks at numbers of renovation of the house singularly, while the economics of the proposed project take into consideration the entire site. None of the preservationists are advocating against the demolition of the second home on this site and have been advocating for a higher density development that encompasses the entire site and adaptively reuses the Orth House as part of such a project. And I have a example in Elliott Park of new development that incorporates the existing building as an adaptive reuse. Please keep in mind that the proposal to wreck the Orth House was not able to gain support at the neighborhood level. Last year's HPC, last year's zoning and planning, last year's full city council, this year's HPC, and now is back here again. To vote to wreck the Orth House quite literally requires that you do not consider it reasonable that interested developers pay a fair market price for the property and that the only option possible is coincidentally the one that maximizes the highest profit for a for-profit developer, displacing marginalized people, eliminating one of the last potential sites in this neighborhood for low-income housing, and wrecking our history. If approved, this would be the first intentional wrecking of a Healy house in Minneapolis since 1981. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roscoe. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Minneapolis City Council. My name is Bob Roscoe, 1401 East River Parkway, Minneapolis. I served on HPC for 21 years, and really that was the early days of preservation. There are times when I thought sometimes that the 10 members on the commission outnumbered the people in the community that supported preservation. But when I'm here this morning, it's just heartening to hear how widespread historic preservation has become to many people and many young people. I'll speak of two things. The loss of integrity issue, I think David Peel brought up an example. I did the architectural work for 3131, and what he said is correct. That house had lost its integrity, but the integrity is brought back, and it's just really one of the jewels of the Healy block. Another thing about the Healy block itself, at the time when the Healy block was nominated as a district, the principle then was to kind of cherry pick buildings from within a particular group. So, and they happened to be, at the time, the thinking was only those on that block. Well, surveys are kind of imperfect first drafts of history. But they can become an invitation to enlarge consciousness that sharpens our focus. And that's what happened here with, we discovered many more Healy houses. New surveys then are required to sharpen the focus, and then a repository of more content, quality, and meaning can follow. St. Paul saves every Cass Gilbert building that they have, and I think TP Healy is our Minneapolis version of that. So this house should be saved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we have three more people, Jana Flistrand, Brad Klein, and then I think the last name is Petra Rickman.
My name is Jana Flistrand. I live at 2112 DuPont Avenue South, and I walk past this house approximately twice a day. This hearing is an appeal for demolition, and many of my concerns, and I support the appeal, and I hope that you will grant the appeal for demolition. Many of my concerns have already been addressed about forcing someone to preserve or actually recreate a historic property, preventing someone from selling a house that is no longer viable, and forcing someone to continue to keep in place a non-conforming use in a home. There have been a lot of arguments about affordable housing as well, and I am an affordable housing professional. I'm very familiar with the example that was highlighted in Elliott Park and with the review process for affordable housing and those state housing funds that were mentioned earlier. This property could not qualify for those preservation or for those funds through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency because it would not be considered viable through that review process. The project in Elliott Park had a scale that made it very difficult to, but possible to save that single-family home that was next door. I was at the grand opening, and the interior is nothing like it was. It is not historic. It feels like a new building. That would not be possible on this site because the scale doesn't have enough space for the new construction to allow for that less financially viable use. I do not see an affordable housing preservation pathway that is an economically viable use. Economic viability is part of the question about whether this is a preservable historic resource. So again, given my expertise in affordable housing and that financing system and what is allowable, I really encourage you to recognize that within the current affordable housing system would not be viable and to approve the demolition.
Thank you. Mr. Klein?
Good morning. My name is Brad Klein. I live at 912 West 32nd Street in the Carrick neighborhood, and I'm actually a new member on the Carrick Neighborhood Board. And after I read all these different articles in the newspapers about this building, I went over and just drove by and stopped by there to take a look at it myself. And there, when I drove up, I saw Mike, the owner of it, on his hands and knees on the back porch, like scraping something off. I walked up and asked if I could take a look at the space just to see for myself, because I'm all for historic preservation. I love old houses. Mike gave me a brief tour, and I invite all of you, if you're going to vote on this, to actually take a few minutes out of your time to walk through and look at this house. And it's a complex issue because, I mean, hearing all these things that everybody's saying, it's not really a black or white thing. It really is gray because it is, a lot of stuff has happened in that house. But after looking at it myself, there's no way this thing could be renovated for like $150,000 that someone else had mentioned earlier today. It would cost a great deal more than that. And the homeowner's hands are tied if he can't sell it. And he already talked before passionately about his own condition. So if people wanted to step up and buy it at a higher rate and renovate it, great, they've had the opportunity, but now he has another opportunity himself to work with the building and deal with it to take care of his own needs. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The last name is Peter Rickmeyer. And then if anyone else would like to speak, you will be able to come up after Mr. Rickmeyer.
Good morning. I'm from North Minneapolis in the Jordan neighborhood, so I'm like looking from the outside inward. So I'd like to address a few things. One is that affordable housing, I live in a depressed area with a lot of affordable housing. But then I thought, well, downtown has a lot of affordable housing for those who believe that $5,000 a month is affordable to them. And then I looked at 2320, this address, and I said, well, the perception of particular groups as it pertains to affordable housing, I'm not sure if affordable housing is $5,000 a month for the executives or $200 a month for people that are on SSI, Social Security. So that's a complex question, is what is affordable housing? And I think it's a direction that the city council needs to take to determine what's going to be affordable housing in that particular neighborhood. The second part is that it seems to me that us taxpayers, and I think Lisa Goodman made a good point a while back ago, us taxpayers have spent $500 million to put up a $1 billion football stadium. And it seems to me that why don't us taxpayers find maybe 1% of the $500 million and restore this historical building? That's just a question. Will be up to city leaders, of course. And I understand that the long-term goal.
Time is up.
Can I finish on my thought?
Yeah.
Oh, you're gracious. Thank you. My final thought is that the long-term vision for this area is high density. And how does that relate to the historical buildings? And again, whatever affordable housing means to particular groups and how that fits in. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and open up our committee for discussion on this item. So I can start. This is my neighborhood. Many of you are my neighbors. I live at 2433 DuPont, which is just a block and a half from here. So I know this very well, and it's been a topic of conversation in my neighborhood for about a year and a half since the first time the project came to the Lowry Hill East Neighborhood Organization meeting, which I attended. So I'm going to move to grant the appeal today to allow the demolition of the historic resource and to direct staff to create findings. And there are a number of reasons why, and I don't want to take too much time, but because this is so important, I want to explain my reasoning. And I really want to thank everyone for coming today and thank the people who are rehabbing the beautiful historic properties in our neighborhood. I live in a house that was built in 1908. It's probably not an historic resource. It's on a block with mostly apartment buildings, many of which were built as well at the turn of the century, which is really the kind of history of our neighborhood, is that's been a big mix of apartment buildings, 4-story buildings, single-family homes, and it continues to evolve in that direction today. The integrity of the property is a big question for me. It's been reviewed 4 separate times, twice during 2 reconnaissance surveys that looked at creating a potential historic district, which I'm very open to discussing with the folks on the blocks, which were identified as contributing to that potential historic district. And then twice by our staff, and both times our staff has reviewed this project carefully, the former home, the boarding house, and found that it did not meet the criteria for historic designation. That question was answered by the City Council, and even if we accept that decision, I think today now we're talking about the economic value of this home, and I can't imagine anyone investing $500,000 or more of loss to restore this building to a single-family home in my neighborhood. I live, like I said, in this neighborhood. My neighborhood was 80% rental in 1965 and maintains that level of mix today. And so I asked the policy question. We made boarding houses non-conforming in 1999. So what's the future of this property? Is it a policy directive to legally mandate preservation of this home and restoration to a single-family home in a neighborhood that has a mix of housing types, where we want to see a density of people living very close to downtown in a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood? I don't think it is. I know there are concerns about the zoning in this area. Staff is working very carefully to look at not only the existing uses of all of the buildings that are in R6, but I've asked them as well to do a market study to analyze what buildings and properties within the R6 zoning might be places where development might be proposed, so we can get on top of that and start having that conversation now instead of after a proposal comes forward. So with that, I'll open up to any of my colleagues who might want to speak on this topic. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for me, one of the big questions is, and I think Mr. Schaefer actually pointed this out, at what point does it move from renovation to replication? And I have a friend who actually goes out, seeks old Volkswagen, Beetles, and cars. He's a car collector, and he fixes them up, resells them. And I think that thinking about his situation, I heard a number earlier, 20% of the house is original, part of the foundation. There might be some pieces of woodwork in there that are original, but I think he would look at a situation where a Volkswagen that was 20% original would not be restoration, that would be replication. If he was to go through, frankly, the uneconomical effort of completely changing that vehicle around and trying to rebuild it as it originally was. So I just want to kind of throw that out there anecdotally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to provide the minority opinion on the panel today and stand up for what I honestly believe in, which is what I've done for many, many years on the council. I came here as a result of the application to demolish the DB Lyon House. When I first ran for the city council, it was the primary reason I ran for the city council, was an effort to demolish a house just like this one in the neighborhood I lived in. I have a long history of working on these mixed-use projects in my ward. The project that Ms. Philstrand talked about was a project I personally worked on, and in fact that house was moved directly as a result of me and my position at the city insisting that we wouldn't work on the project unless they rehab the house. I also am a huge supporter and have built my career on affordable housing, and that particular project, the developer actually moved the house over to be able to have space to build a larger quality affordable housing unit, and they incorporated this house. I will say it was completely gutted from top to bottom, and there are 8 affordable housing units in it. There wasn't anything in the house worth saving, but the house itself, and you've seen the pictures of it, was significant in the Elliott Park neighborhood. This house will see an untimely death as a result of its location. And let me just repeat that one more time for Mr. Roper. This house will see its untimely death as a result of its location. If this was in Lowry Hill or Kenwood, we would not be having this conversation. There would be no R6 zoning. There wouldn't be a movement to demolish homes for more dense, mixed-use housing. And it just makes me so sad to think about the fact that when this house was built at that time, there were tons of other houses around it just like it. And what scares me is the tipping point. To have someone get up and actually say, I represent someone who owns 4 more, so do this essentially so I can do the same thing at some point, really makes me sad. I'm not from here. This isn't, in a sense, my personal history. It's the history that I speak of that so many other people care about. And to hear Bob Roscoe and John Cunningham get up and talk about the importance to them, this isn't a band of crazy preservationists who do a lot of talking and no walking. These are people who do a lot of walking on preserving houses in our city. And I just feel like it does not meet the criteria. There are reasonable alternatives. Often we get to the point where this happens before a legitimate, reasonable alternative comes up. And I think we should be standing by what we believe in, which is preserving affordable housing in our city. That's an equity issue. Standing up for our zero waste policies, that's an equity issue. And trying not to be the council that says density is at the expense of preservation. And I sadly fear that that's the direction we're moving in.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion to grant the appeal and direct staff to prepare findings. I think today, clerk, please call the roll.
Lisa Goodman. No. Andrew Johnson. Aye. Barbara Johnson. Aye. Kevin Reich. Aye. Abdi Warsami. Lisa Bender.
Aye. That motion carries. Thank you all for coming today. We don't use seconds in committee. Okay, thank you so much. Now we're moving on to discussion, which is item number 3 of the Thrive MSP 2040 plan. And I know staff has prepared a presentation. This is the Metropolitan Council's draft 30-year development guide for our 7-county metro area.
I think so.
Hi, yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, Chair Bender, council members, thank you for your time and consideration today as we begin to formally draft comments for Met Council on Thrive MSP 2040, the regional plan. So the regional plan is updated every 10 years by state statute. I know many of you probably know that. And it, along with the regional systems plans, trigger the required update of our comprehensive plan. Thrive is currently out for public comment, and our comments must be submitted by April 28th. So that's the deadline that we're aiming for. The request we have before you today. Oh, this is not working. Okay. The request we have before you today is for council action directing staff to prepare these comments. CPED has provided briefings within the city enterprise and discussion sessions and has actively solicited comments from other city departments to establish a framework for responding to the draft regional plan. So, as I said, these comments are due on April 28th. We have engaged with the entire city on this with the help of intergovernment relations. And we've also attended the Met Council listening sessions and discussion sessions and coordinated with outside partners, including the Park Board, on our response. Comments were accepted from other city departments until April 14th, and we will continue to work with council members and the mayor to prepare our formal response. It will include a cover letter, detailed comments, and an archive of all the received comments that we've assembled. So this gives you a sense of the timeline for this process. As I said, we're engaged now with Thrive MSP 2040, but Met Council will additionally be releasing policy plans on housing, transportation, regional parks, and water resources over the next year and early into 2015. The jobs, housing, and population projections are also something that we're commenting on, and those will be finalized in the fall of 2015. The system statements, the regional system statements, are expected in the fall of 2015. And then once those system statements come out, that triggers our official beginning to update the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan, which has to be done within 3 years of that release. So the housing policy plan expected in summer 2014, transportation policy, I guess we just went through this, but the point of this slide is just to let you know that Thrive is a broad document, and there will be opportunities for us to comment on each of these specific policy directions when these additional plans are released. So there are two components to the comments. One is on the forecasting. They've made projections for the region and also local projections that we will comment on. And they've also created the policy document itself, which is more the narrative and the policy values. The forecasts are what I'm going to talk about first. I mean, basically, we understand now that the region is growing and changing. We're in a demographic positive, which is great. Managing growth is a good problem to have. And about 2/3 of that population growth is likely to result from natural growth, more births than deaths, longer life expectancies. So we know that growing families and seniors are communities that we want to really pay attention to and need to plan to accommodate. In-migration is also significant. But you can see here, there's some substantial changes and developments happening. When you look at population by race and ethnicity, in 2010, 24% of our population were people of color. By 2040, that's going to be 40%. That's substantially a substantially different city. And same with age. In 2010, 11% of our population were seniors. That doubles by 2030, and by 2040, we're really talking about 1 in 5 residents being 65 or older. So again, this is a planning issue, it's a housing inventory issue, it's a services issue that we want to address. So this is just to give you a sense of the categories that the region sets out. You can see that we are part of what they call the urban center. And I'll just note here that the urban center was previously just Minneapolis and St. Paul. They've now added a number of other cities to that category. We'll keep an eye on what that means in terms of funding and allocation based on urban goals. But the other categories you can see there in the legend, suburban, edge, suburban, you get into the rural and diversified rural. The regional forecast suggests something that we're not sure we necessarily agree with, that we will grow in place. So, you can see, and I'm not sure if my laser pointer is going to work here. Will it? Yes, it will. So what I want to point to here, and you'll have to follow along on your sheet. This is a little too small to read, but on this line, these percentages here, you can see from 2010 to 2040 in all three categories: population, households, and employment. The urban center is getting a declining share of population, a declining share of households, and a declining share of employment is projected. So even that's the urban center, even with their expanded definition, including additional cities. We're not sure if that's right. If it is right, and we are really just going to grow in place in a status quo way, maybe we should have some values about shifting that, because it really isn't in keeping with the policy direction, which values compact transit-related development. There are sustainability and climate action goals that we'll see. So we're just not sure about that.
Could I just clarify? You're saying, and maybe others have questions too, you're saying that this assumes that the percentage population growth will maintain its same projection, or that it's the share of actual people will stay?
So actually on both fronts, the share of growth and the share of the region. I come to a Minneapolis side later where there's a distinction made, so that's why I'm tripping up on that a little bit.
Council President Johnson also has a question.
No, this is the share of the region. Yeah, the share of the total region. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a curiosity, but I do think it's important for us to quarrel with this estimation, because I will tell you, in my head, I think I remember 2 censuses at least that the Met Council's projections were really off, by 1 million people added to the region that they predicted. I think in the 90 census and the 2000 census they were off. So I think it's important that we state that we don't see it going this way. And if we do see the trend, this is what we would insist on to mitigate that, or to change it.
Yes, and we appreciate that comment, Council President Johnson, because it really is tied to resources ultimately. Those allocations are ultimately tied to resources.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, not only are you tied to resources and how they're allocated, but the necessity for resources when you talk about the cost-benefit analysis of the extended infrastructure at the edge of the metropolitan area. If you did a sort of a cost comparison of maintenance and expansion at the edge, it's multiple times more than its converse in the center. And that's, to me, where the rubber hits the road, the money to sustain the system projected.
Right. Thank you. So we just wanted to demonstrate that. I mean, if we just look at where they do project the highest share, so this isn't everything here. We just pulled out where's the highest share of regional population growth projected. The highest share is 20%, and it's really happening at the suburban edge, the emerging suburban edge. The highest share of regional job growth, which is also 20% of the total share, is projected to happen in suburban areas. And looking at our role, the urban center, so we're expected to receive about 19.5% of regional population growth and 26% of regional job growth, so less on both fronts. Now, if we look specifically at Minneapolis, we see a very similar trend. So if you could just go to Minneapolis share of region, in the second table there, you'll see a declining share again from 14.5% population share in 2010 to 12.65% in 2040, and the same trend for households and the same trend for employment. Now, I do want to qualify that by saying that our share of growth, if we're not talking about the total region, numbers in the total region, but really just looking at that wedge of the share of growth that's projected between 2010 and 2040, there we have actually a pretty good number. I think we're the highest in terms of percentage of the growth that's going to happen, not the total share of the region. So here's where we see at least one example of a discrepancy. So our projected share of growth for City of Minneapolis, 9.83% of regional household growth occurring between 2010 and 2040 in Minneapolis. The actual growth in the last 5 years, we have issued 25% of the region's new dwelling unit permits, 25% of the region. So, there's a trend that we recognize that's happening. We think that the model, which kind of looks at a 30-year horizon, might not be seeing this little blip as particularly relevant. But in fact, we think there's a sea change, and that this move back to urban centers it's not a blip. It's maybe a new normal.
Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Bunson, one of the things I think we should think about, too, is that in this fully developed city, we have neighborhoods which have huge volumes of available lots.
Yes.
Because of foreclosures and tornadoes and all the other things that have happened in North Minneapolis, and just the housing market being troublesome. So we have a huge stock of vacant land in the fully developed city that we should point out, I think. And as you say, resources are allocated, that would be a place that we could look to try and enhance the marketplace that would allow new construction, which is expensive, to happen.
Yes.
Via subsidy or something like that. So,
Thank
thanks.
you. Thank you. Yes, we feel we can, through capacity, and should develop thoughtful ways to grow and accommodate more of that growth here.
I think Councilmember Rake has a question.
Yeah. Thank you. More of a comment. I think to the term blip, I would say, taking a broader lens, it seems to be a very consistent trend. Any metropolitan area in the nation, heck, in the world, where you have where its economy is doing well, you have urban core growth. It's a strict correlation. It's universally applied not only in our nation but globally, as I stated. And so I think these things need to be taken into account. That dynamic. Conversely, in areas where there isn't economic growth, you do see the depopulation of the urban core. And so I think those are the indicators that should be somehow imbued into these analysis at some point.
Thank you.
I think it's also notable. I'm not sure how well our region does, frankly, at directing growth into the center core of the city. I think we have some great policies in place, but others I think we could argue are really not reinforcing this trend, and that this trend is happening despite, in a lot of cases, our regional policies that have been emphasizing suburban growth. So even more reason to echo what my colleagues have already said, that we really support commenting on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just say one thing on top of that, which is it's something that we noted in the map, which isn't shown in this presentation, of projected employment growth. There's a very clear indication of employment growing on the 494 corridor in the western suburbs, which is sort of intuitive in terms of how we think about employment today, probably, but we think looking at employment that same way in 2040 reflects the lack of a strategy. That if we're still doing that highway-driven suburban growth for employment in 2040, that means there's a lack of a strategy. So moving on to the policy piece. The policy piece, we actually see a lot of values in common throughout the document, and I think that we would like to take a stance of being very supportive of some of the directions of policy, particularly some new territory that the region is getting into related to climate change and economic competitiveness. But to give you a sense of how they're organizing the document, they have defined 5 outcomes. And these outcomes sort of weave regional values together with their core policy authorities and activities. So in other words, they don't want to create a plan that's in silos. They really want some of those things to work together toward qualitative outcomes. So the outcomes that they've defined are stewardship, which is about managing resources, whether they're natural, infrastructural, or financial. Prosperity, which really talks to fostering that economic competitiveness at a regional scale. Equity, which is really about access and choice for residents, success, prosperity, quality of life. livability, about creating and renewing. Renewing is a key piece there. Vibrant places and underlying infrastructure. And sustainability. So there are a number of categories that really speak to well-being, whether it's natural systems and resources, climate change, or economic productivity, being able to maintain productivity and well-being over the long term. So integration and accountability, these are themes that they kind of use as a layer on top of the outcomes. They basically identify the fact that resources are going to probably continue to decline in terms of their ability to spend dollars. Part of that is because of the federal government's decline of resources available for infrastructure and so on. But so they talk about this idea of integration as efficiency of dollars. What they're looking for is for a single project or a single priority to cover several of these outcomes. They want to address multiple problems at once in a holistic way. So that creates an opportunity for us as they begin to overlay those outcomes with their regional systems and with our local plans. We can talk about stacked values and benefits, and that approach will help us to compete, I think, for those dollars. Accountability, they really speak to a data-driven approach, which is a value that we have also adopted at the city. So again, I think the development of those metrics and indicators are something that we can participate in and hopefully work together on. A notable new territory, which I touched on a moment ago, in the prosperity outcome, this economic competitiveness goal is just, we think, a phenomenal step forward to look at economic competitiveness on a regional scale. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I won't go into it now. Equity, they have assessed equity regionally, and they've come up with a map of racially concentrated areas of poverty. They also have a map just about areas of concentrated poverty. And sustainability, again, new territory here related to climate change, which we welcome. So just to get into that equity piece, we wanted to pull that out since this is also something that we're putting forward at the city. The region is really looking at two primary functions with its equity lens. One is to connect residents in RCAP and ACP areas to jobs and opportunity. So they speak to transit-dependent communities, and they speak to land use patterns, the ability to move from home to work. And access to the systems that allow that to happen. The second thing they really address is really about funding. So they are going to commit some of their funding resources, especially through the Livable Communities program, to this equity goal. So they're asking people to address in a grant application how that project addresses equity. And they're going to look actually, interestingly, at subsidizing market rate housing in some of these RCAP areas, because what they're aiming for is a more income diverse community. And they're exploring, they haven't committed to, but they're exploring the idea of funding set aside that would be specifically geared toward these kinds of activities.
Council President.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Monson, to me, of course, this is the most important part of this plan going forward, and I would hope that we would support kind of creative ideas of being able to income diversify these RCAP areas, because that I think when I first blush read the report, I thought, oh my goodness, they're just going to say we need to put more money in transit in those areas, and then that's going to make people able to get to work and all that sort of thing. And I really think we've gotten the challenge is so dramatic that I think we're going to have to look at some of these market enhancements that will encourage people of a broader income base to reinvest in these neighborhoods. And people fear gentrification, and I always say we got a lot of space. We have vacant land, we have vacant homes in these neighborhoods, and so nobody's going to get displaced. What we want to do is make things better for everyone, and try and bring everybody into this broader economy of the metro area, which is really leaving some people behind. The one thing I would say too about livable communities is that we have found in North Minneapolis that you really have to have a developer in hand to apply for a livable communities grant, and that is a real challenge for us. We have a number of developers that are not interested in working in North Minneapolis, and I'm talking about for-profit developers, I guess is what I want to say.
Yeah.
And so we've been essentially ignored by that for-profit community because the economics just don't work. And so I think they really need to rethink, if they're serious about this, they really need to rethink their whole process to perhaps put the incentive up front that might attract a developer, a for-profit developer, to be able to invest in an area. We've got whole swaths of land in the Lowry corridor that the only people that are interested in doing work there are nonprofit developers, and that doesn't help further that economic base. So kind of put the money ahead of attracting the developer. And that's really disadvantaged us over the years in trying to apply. I think specifically, when I think about it, the county has applied for livable communities dollars on the Lowry corridor and been unable to compete because of that very fact. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll be sure to include that. So the plan also includes these 6, they're really maps. They're sort of layers of information that overlay the region and that clarifies some areas of focus for the region. One that we just spoke about was racially concentrated areas of poverty. There are also, there's also a map of station areas on existing and planned transitways and goals related to that. Water supply considerations, job and activity centers, wastewater service areas, and ecological resources. So these sort of get overlaid, and then really they need to be coped with on a granular scale by local municipalities. So the region kind of has a position, they provide the map, and then they ask you to sort of, it's more like performance criteria, and engage with these regional goals actively. So this, don't be afraid of this slide. I won't say everything that's on it. But so there are some specific policy areas that Thrive goes over. And as I said, a lot of these will be accompanied, of course, in the future with its own policy document. But just to kind of give you the broad brush strokes of what's here and what we will comment on. So housing guidance really focuses on affordability and choice. They're not really talking about a broad unified housing policy here. It's really focusing on affordable housing and expanding choices for every resident. So a couple of comments that I would pull out. Thrive observes the surge of demand for multifamily housing and the trend of movement back to central cities, but it really stops short of kind of embracing that or prioritizing that. And it also doesn't really explore the demographic side of it, of, why are these housing trends occurring? We think that there would be an opportunity to develop some really interesting policies or programs that address that, specifically maybe related to senior housing or millennials or families. Thrive's overarching value statements broadly support compact and sustainable development. It's referred to many, many times as a value. But again, the housing section does not really propose ways to impact land use patterns that would reduce vehicle miles traveled or encourage housing proximate to employment. So the only spatial lens related to the housing policy is really the transit lens. There's an association there. And here and elsewhere, Thrive applies an equity lens to the Livable Communities Program dollars, again, so associated with housing, but looking at that grant program. But although it lays that equity lens over the dollars, it doesn't define specific criteria for how applicants would pass that threshold. What do you have to do to sort of demonstrate that there's an equity value? So we would like to get more clarity on that. The next big theme is transportation. This section, which really gets at the desire to create a multimodal, interconnected regional system is very consistent with our policies. You know, we actually have almost no criticism of this, only maybe suggestions for how we could even do more. I think that, you know, the system that they envision for residents and workers, it's really for integrated movement from mode to mode, integrating those modes, provision for multiple modes within a right-of-way, and they have this very close attention on walking as a piece of the modal network. So interconnected public street system is encouraged, and we just see opportunities for collaboration at several scales on this front. We think they could do a little bit better. They have an opportunity in addressing the system of industrial and export mobility infrastructure. The fact that they're looking at economic competitiveness on a regional scale just begs the question of also looking at the infrastructure of that economy and having some ideas there. So we'll make that suggestion. And there's one more thing to call out here, which is, of course, we have an adopted modal preference for streetcar in a couple of areas. Streetcars are not yet showing up as a mode on their special features map. We would like to see that happen, and we certainly would like streetcars to be identified as a mode within the system that they discuss. They do mention it one time, but as you can see, it's not fully present in the document.
Councilmember Wright.
And, you know, participating in some recent TAB conversations, I know there's, you know, from some of the representatives on that advisory body that are from the outer ring areas, they really like to rattle their cage very aggressively when that term even gets referenced. It's supposedly the mode of which they should not, or no one should speak, I guess. But if we're talking about partnerships here in a document that reflects our values, it's got to be in there, or we're just not partners.
Yeah.
Period.
Thank you. There's just, sorry, one additional thing related to the airport. So the document talks about the need to protect and preserve compatible land uses around regional assets. And we would like to encourage them to also identify that a balanced approach needs to be considered where conflict already exists. And we'll make a comment about that. So regional parks is the next big policy area. And I think our biggest comment here is that regional parks should be contributing to all 5 outcomes. Right now, they have them very strongly situated in sort of the livability and quality of life and natural resources buckets. But we certainly think that they should be considered as a part of that integrated multimodal transportation system. I mean, we've got parks with trails and paths that people can use to get from home to work or home to other places. We also think that the parks should come into play with some of the goals around water resources, sustainability, and climate change, because you know we have these sort of emissions goals that are out there from the state, but emissions is only one piece of the picture in terms of climate change. We also want to do carbon capture, and we want to talk about urban tree canopy. So we think the parks have a bigger role than is currently present, and we feel that the park board is going to be making comments similar to this.
Council President and Councilmember Wright have questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman Swanson. I think also I'm glad that you're looking at for the areas of enhancement equity as a parks being an important part of the equity equation. Having served for I think 18 years on the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. You know, I was just reading the other day that they actually are looking at equity in the parks realm, and Mr. Cunningham talked about that at a meeting. And I remember when I came on, there was a young man named Bill Barble, and he had been on what was the suburban Hennepin Park District at the time, and he made the observation, and so this was, I think my daughter's 32 years old, 32 years ago, that the regional park system was really being built for white people. And it was really, you know, shocking at the time that there was that observation. Now, having said that, I don't think it's changed that much. And one of the things that is a challenge is in the regional park, and you have it under, there's a need to look at what's beyond what is considered a regional park to fulfill outcomes. There also is a basic restriction, I think, in the acreage that's required to be for a regional park to be designated as a regional park. And we actually, in North Minneapolis, the one regional park that we have in the Camden neighborhood was designated a regional park through legislation because it didn't meet the criteria of the Metropolitan Council at the time. And thank you to legislators Carl Croning, Jim Rice, Bill Luther at the time. We now have a regional park along the Mississippi River, if you can imagine. That wasn't considered enough of a resource to be a regional park. So our legislators designated that. We have a lovely regional park there now on both sides of the river. So I think one of the things we should talk about is that arbitrary restriction in a fully developed area of acreage and all the work that has been done about relating park investment to value, like housing values in a community. And so there's been massive work done on that. So I think we should be really strong about this, that there's opportunities through park development, especially now that the emphasis is on the riverfront above the falls in Minneapolis, because that is going to be an extremely expensive vision to complete. And so we are going to need some substantial resources to see that happen. And they've made the opening, and I think we need to take advantage of it.
Thank you. Those are good points. So water sustainability is the next section, and there's also a lot of material here. There are two major points that we would like to pull out. One is that we agree water resource issues are a key stewardship focus. There's been a lot of talk nationally about the scarcity of water for future generations, and depleting our groundwater as we are now is unsustainable, especially in the context of a growing regional population with more stress on that system. So we support the region's interest in implementing best practices, and we look forward to collaborating on that. The second piece that I'd like to pull out is that wastewater infrastructure is something that we have a substantial interest in. So two things there. We support Met Council moving away from expansion of this infrastructure and toward maintenance of existing infrastructure. We see that as a very positive step that we would like to support. And the second thing there is the city sees a need for more clarity and action here around sewer availability charges and combined sewer overflow issues. So those are comments that we'll make with much more detail in the letter itself.
I really appreciate you including the SAC fee issue here, because as I was talking with small businesses in my ward, this is a huge issue for them, and it is a real financial burden to very small businesses that, again, are part of why people are choosing to live in the core of the city is because of our unique small businesses, and this is really seen as a barrier. And I think in the past, we've been charging our small businesses to build sewer systems in exurban areas, and just from a regional equity perspective, that seems not the direction we want to go in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Council President has a comment as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on the issue of water resources, too, I wonder if it does make some sense for us to include in the remarks the information that we have capacity in our existing water system, that because of conservation efforts, we're not using all our existing capacity, and we could provide water, and have been talking to adjoining communities about doing that to increase our cost efficiency, but then also discourage this well drilling that goes on in neighborhoods that are right next to us.
Absolutely. Thank you. On sustainability and resilience, we support regional and local planning on climate change. I mean, this is, as I said, a big step forward. There's a lot to affirm and value in this new area of inquiry and guidance for the region. So we certainly are excited to see this. I think, Met Council could use its authority to encourage use of renewables and enhanced energy conservation in aviation. And this is a comment from our sustainability office, who added that MAC and its associated air travel contribute about 7% of Minneapolis's annual greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than from solid waste disposal and wastewater treatment combined. So there are some specific things that the region could do to have an immediate and positive impact here. We believe, however, that something is missing from this category, and that we could do much more as a region to address food security and access to safe and healthy food. There are a couple of regional programs that are focused on agriculture. I think one has a 10-acre threshold and one is more like 40 acres. We think it would be fantastic to add to those agricultural conservation programs some incentives for urban and suburban agriculture programs. So we will comment on that. And I guess I would also like to say that, you know, there are a lot of areas of impact on climate change that we as public authorities can have a huge impact on. Land use patterns, commuter patterns, and regional systems design all would have a significant impact here. And we encourage and support the region in this effort. So another new area that we are excited to see is economic competitiveness. And we absolutely agree with the region that a regional economic view is strategically important and necessary. It's now generally understood that national and international economy is primarily urban economy. It's an organized network of metropolitan economies. So I think McKinsey reported last year that 60% of GDP is generated in 100 cities around the world. So we agree with the need for an economic strategy that views the region as an integrated network of economic assets. So we also want to comment here on the region's stated intent to prioritize development and redevelopment sites at the regional scale. We think that will be extremely useful and certainly would provide a lot of areas for partnership. And finally, we want to comment on the fact that we very much look forward to the study of industrial assets and inventory. The region has said that they will be identifying industrial land and assets and will be making that available as a resource. We would suggest that, as I said earlier, at the same time that they create that map of industrial assets regionally, they should also be looking at their transportation goals and identifying industrial and export mobility infrastructure, which would support that landscape of industrial land. So these two things together, we think, would deliver cities great insight into how we can contribute to regional economic competitiveness.
Council President.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
That's okay. Go ahead. That was old.
So those are the broad policy areas. There's a lot more detail, obviously, on each slide that you could delve into, and there will be a much more detail once we submit the final comments. But the next steps for us now are to seek action from this committee, directing us to draft these comments in response to Thrive MSP 2040. We'll then develop that submittal, the letter, and the detailed comments with the mayor, council members, city departments, the park board, and of course, we'll continue to work within CPED together. So the goal is that a letter and detailed comments will be submitted to Met Council on or before April 28th. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Okay, thank you so much for everyone's work on this. I know it was a robust document, and you did a great job summarizing for us. I appreciate it, especially the way that you organized the information about our positions on some of the issues. And I know there'll be opportunity for everyone to continue to look at the detailed comments. So I think I need to receive and file the presentation. Is that right?
Chair Bender, you could do that, but also you should affirmatively make a direction to staff to exactly as said on the slide. Sorry, draft comments in response to the Thrive plan as presented by Ms. Monson today.
Great. So I will move to receive and file the presentation and direct staff to draft comments in response to Thrive MSP 2040. All those in favor, please say aye. aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion carries, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.